put the link to the agenda in the chat for folks. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Oh, okay, we have exceeded our quorum. So, Joe, whenever you think we've got critical mass, you can just go.
Seven, is that, I can never remember what quorum.
Yeah, I think quorum 7. We've got over that now. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, at least 9 people. So I think we're good. So if you want to get going, let me know. Otherwise, we can give it a couple more minutes.
Let's get going.
All right. Good morning. This is the October 24, 2024 meeting of the Climate Council Agriculture and Ecosystem Subcommittee. We're scheduled to meet from 10 to 12 this morning. I put the agenda in the chat, and I'll just kind of run through it briefly right now. We're going to spend a little bit of time, first off, hearing about some additional input sessions that the Climate Council has organized related to municipal input. Then Jael and I can give some inputs, some updates on the cross-cutting pathways work task groups that have just started to meet this week. She and I are on different ones of them representing our subcommittee. And then we're hoping to spend some time talking about how to best engage Native folks from the region per Earl's suggestion last week to have a focus meeting with Abenaki leaders, and had since heard some thoughts from Judy and thought it'd be great to just kind of have that conversation broadly with the group. Then we're going to break for public comment and then spend the second half of the meeting focused on the task group work, kind of refreshing where we're at, looking at deadlines and expectations, and making sure that we're all set to go to discuss initial prioritizations at our November 7th meeting, and that work can inform the public input sessions that are starting to follow. And then we'll have another public comment and we'll break. How does that agenda sound to everybody? Excellent. All right. So here, barring any questions or comments, I guess we'll get right into it. And let's see, is Sophie with us? She is. So Sophie, please tell us about yet another opportunity for engagement coming out of the Climate Council.
Sure thing. So I think you all know that the Ag and Eco input sessions are scheduled, and that's great. We're working on getting invites out for those. The additional thing that Billy is talking about is that there will be 2 opportunities for municipalities to have their voices heard in an input session. Those are both going to be held on the 19th of November. They're slightly different in that we're collaborating with RPCs on getting the word out and facilitation of those meetings, which is different than, your Ag and Eco input sessions are going to be facilitated by Consensus Building Institute. But both of those on the 19th are going to be the same content. There's just 2 different times options, so people can join the one that works the best for them. And those are going to be highlighting municipal actions that are being focused on for this update. So Liz had sent out an email asking for subcommittees to elevate the actions that they're looking on that are specifically, targeted at the municipal level and involve municipalities as implementers or stakeholders. And so those are the ones that are going to be covered in those meetings. And therefore, it's going to be cross-cutting. It's going to have content from each of the subcommittees in those ones. I think that gives a summary overall. Liz, do you want to add anything that I might have missed?
I think that's good.
So thank you for that, Sophie. Just to jump in initially. So that sounds like another fairly significant task for the subcommittee to identify all the existing actions that relate to municipalities. What is our deadline for that work?
Liz, I'm going to let you speak to that since you sent out the email about that.
Yeah, it's the 28th. So that's this Monday.
4 days from now. Yeah. And who directed these municipal input sessions? Where did the impetus from this come from?
I'm trying to recall where that came. I forget where it exactly came from, but it's a way for us to engage with municipalities on actions that would impact their work.
Yeah, unless others feel otherwise, I don't know that we as a subcommittee are going to be able to do that. Like, we have a tremendous amount of work that we're already trying to tackle. We're going to talk about our task groups later this morning, and I suspect folks are already, kind of behind schedule and prioritizing the existing suite of actions. So, without kind of really understanding where these things came from, I don't know that we're going to really be able to do that task.
Yeah, I mean, the 28th deadline is informed by the fact that on the 1st, we have Municipality Day at National Life. So that will help inform that engagement with local officials. But then we'll also carry over to the 2 sessions that we're going to have later on. But that's why that informed that deadline of the 28th.
Well, I'll put that aside for now. Sorry to take up the time. If others have kind of thoughts or comments based on what was just shared, feel free to get into it right now or questions. Okay, hearing none, I guess, I'm happy to try to figure out, working with agency staff, the best way to kind of tease out the actions that are related to municipalities. I don't know that it's reasonable to ask you all to do that work right now, given everything else that's going on, and that where we're at in our own process. So unless others feel strongly otherwise, happy to try to move that piece forward on our collective behalf. Yeah, and I guess, I would really like for us, if the rest of the subcommittee agrees with this statement, I would love for us to communicate back to the Climate Council that they have to stop putting new obligations on the subcommittees at this point, because we already have a very aggressive timeline to deliver a significant work product, and to constantly be introducing new engagement opportunities and tasks associated with them is incredibly disruptive and probably exceeding the time allotments that they indicated would be necessary from subcommittee members. So happy to kind of pass it back along.
Go ahead, Sophie.
It's new. These ones aren't new. They've been part of the whole engagement plan from when that's been communicated. And I understand it's a lot to keep track of, but just want to clarify that this isn't coming like today as new news.
Okay, thanks for clarifying that.
So we're looking to pull out pathways and strategies that are related to the work of municipalities. Am I understanding that task correctly, Sophie?
Yeah.
I can help with that, Billy.
Okay, great. Yeah, maybe we can talk offline and kind of break up the pathways and you take a few and I'll take a few and then we can just
Okay.
knock it out. Okay. Judy,
Has this previously been advertised?
This meeting or the municipality work?
The municipality work?
Do you mean the work or like the events, like the date of the event?
The event that they want people to come and speak. It just seems a little um somebody's assumed that we've had the opportunity to discuss and come to an agreement on something we want to present before that's even happened. I don't think anybody should be going or anybody should be talking until we have an agreement as a consensus as a group.
Well, I can't talk. I'm going to be out of town, so I'm not able to present anything.
yeah, my understanding is that we're just trying to identify actions in the existing climate action plan that having municipal overlay. Is that correct?
Yeah, so it's for the update. So what you're working on right now that
Oh,
would have impact to municipalities. And then also no one from the subcommittee is presenting its climate action and office staff. We just want to make sure that we're capturing updates and work from all of the subcommittees. And we're being inclusive in that effort and offering the opportunity to do that.
yeah, we're
Yeah,
not
but
gonna have our
that
recommendations by the 28th.
we're not. It's going to be like putting the cart before the horse.
Yeah.
We will not even have had a chance to discuss what other people have done in other committees.
Yeah, so we're not even gonna meet as a full group to discuss our initial task group recommendations until the 7th of November. So, you know, we can try to have something out of that conversation, but we're not going to, this timeline doesn't, this directive came out about a week ago. We've had a set timeline targeting our November 7th meeting for that initial screen of collective priorities for a long time now. So we're not going to be able to have updated actions ready by the 28th.
Okay.
Yeah, and I don't know, Liz, do you chime in if I'm off base here, but I wonder if the sorry about my dog if you can hear her. I wonder is the ask for like recommended actions, or is it similar to the input sessions that are happening, more of like a direction? Like it doesn't have to be.
Yeah, that's right. It could be a direction. Just like here's like a broad, here's what we're working on. Here's the direction we're going in. Here, here's some pieces that could potentially impact municipalities. If you have thoughts, let us know, kind of thing. But it doesn't need to. I don't think it has like to what we're saying be set in stone. It could be a direction.
But we won't have direction until everybody presents and we discuss it. I'm assuming we're going to be able to hear from the other committees. We're not just going to hear from our committee, correct?
Do you mean the task groups within our subcommittee, like the different groups that we're gonna hopefully pull those all together prior to our next meeting, and then we can discuss as a full group. And we're not gonna move anything forward without the full group.
Right. So how do we even have direction until we do that?
We're not going to. So that I'm basically just, I think we're not gonna be able to provide anything on the 28th.
It looks like Abby has her hand
Abby.
raised.
Yeah, I wonder, thank you. I wonder if the municipal sessions could be to just hear what agricultural and ecosystem type issues municipalities are thinking about, are interested in, struggling with, and that could just be another form of information for each of then the task groups within the subcommittee to consider when setting the direction. I will say, like, as someone working in agriculture, that I don't often have a lot of time to engage with planners at the municipal level. And yet I feel like there's a lot of impact around kind of like municipal prioritization that does affect the use of ag land. And I would be curious. I mean, I am personally curious and professionally curious, kind of like what are the issues that municipalities are focusing on and curious and kind of like working on. Whether this subcommittee feels like it has time to engage in another conversation, I respect that, Billy. And I also hear, that there is and feel that tight timeline as well. But can also recognize this as an opportunity to engage with a population that we may not have a lot of overlap with, and that could be
Yeah,
valuable.
absolutely. I think I believe I think there's ways to get good engagement from municipal representatives at this meeting. I think the issue is that we're just not going to be in a position to move forward our updated priorities by the October 28th deadline, because we're not going to be done with those anytime before the 7th. So that's the only issue I'm pointing out. I think there's certainly ways that we can engage and try to get feedback from these stakeholders kind of on the broad work of the subcommittee. But I don't think we're going to do. That's just one additional.
A lot of towns do have town forests and or conserved land that they own and operate, some community garden space, things like that. So those issues do intersect with our work. So Abby, I like your suggestion though of just getting feedback from them in terms of where they see um, a need for change or actions around managing their forest lands or their conserved lands.
Yeah, I think I like Abby's suggestion. I think, yeah, if folks from the subcommittee wanted to send us topics or questions, that'd be good for us to engage municipal officials and planners with. That'd be great as well.
And where does that fit into the discussion, the agenda schedule we have now? I mean, if they come back with suggestions we've not considered, does that mean we redo what we just did? Where does it fit into the agenda?
You mean the feedback that we might hear from the
Yep.
municipal stakeholders?
Yep.
Well, we're going to get feedback from them potentially. We're going to have those two stakeholder meetings in early November that are explicitly about getting feedback on our work. So I think the goal is that the task groups have initial prioritizations that the full subcommittee discusses at our next meeting on November 7th. Then we have the balance of November and early December to work as a group to finalize our priorities, taking into consideration the feedback that we're getting from these various engagement opportunities. So I think that's the overall arc of the work as envisioned.
So you're saying this would simply be one more opportunity for input?
I believe so, yeah.
Any more thoughts? So is it okay if we go ahead and Billy and I kind of draft something, or do other people wanna just some looking for input from the municipalities? Does anyone else have suggestions on what we should be focusing on, or are you all okay if Billy and I just run with this? I'm sure it's gonna be,
I'd
I don't know.
appreciate an opportunity to review whatever you guys draft, but if you have the wherewithal and gumption to draft something, more than happy to let you guys do that. But I'd
Okay,
like to
and we'll
be
share
able
it
to
out, of
provide some
course.
input before it goes out.
Okay. Is that gonna work for folks? Trail and I will try to find some time to put together some kind of questions or framing comments for this engagement session. And we'll share it with you all as quickly as we can for some feedback, and we'll get it over to Liz in advance of these meetings. Sound good? All right. Excellent. All right. So moving on to some other work that's happening per the Climate Council's directive. In the initial, the initial climate action plan is organized in a number of pathways that have strategies and actions under them. And the pathways are kind of topically specific. As the initial plan was being pulled together, there was an acknowledgement that there were certain actions that kind of were cross-cutting and hit on a number of different subcommittees' interests, a number of different kind of topical themes, and were kind of a higher level sort of idea than the more granular nature of the pathways. And these were identified as cross-cutting themes. And I believe those cross-cutting themes are education, workforce, and compact settlement. The idea being that there's education opportunities and needs related to to ag and ecosystems, to cross-sector mitigation, to rural resilience, to basically to just transitions, to kind of all the topical themes that we work on. Similarly, there's workforce needs that support all those efforts. And then the compact settlement theme is one where there's cross-cutting actions and opportunities necessary to incentivize growth in areas that have the lowest carbon footprint and take development pressure off our natural working lands. So the Climate Council pulled a number of actions into these cross-cutting themes, and now they've directed members of subcommittees to kind of participate on these three work groups to do the same exercise we're doing, to kind of look at the actions from the initial plan and determine whether any revisions, updates are needed, and then prioritize them for the next plan. So Jael and I are representing our subcommittee on those three groups. They are meeting for the first time this week. Two of the groups have met so far, and then there'll be another one immediately after this meeting today. And we'll meet again next week. And I think the hope is that after those two facilitated meetings, there'll be some output that can be handed on to the council to work with. I think I'll let Jael speak from her experience in a second. I think from my experience, it's not been super dissimilar to our work in that it's a lot to get your arms around. Um, and people bring different perspectives and familiarity with the subject matter to the conversation, but hoping that we can work with others to move that stuff forward. And if anyone's interested, I believe those are all on the Climate Council website. I could be wrong, but if they are, then everyone can look at the calendar, the agendas, and other resources. Yeah, they are. They're all on the calendar. I'll put the calendar in the chat here for folks' benefit. So if people are interested in kind of looking at what actions are covered under those cross-cutting themes, that stuff's all available in the respective meeting entries on the calendar. So I don't know, Jael, if you have anything else you'd like to share or discuss on this topic, that'd be great.
Yeah, just their work is, I don't know, it seemed a little more manageable than what we're focusing on. I was a little jealous. But yeah, just in terms of, it's hard because all these different issues are interconnected, and trying to really look at how, what we do with our landscape impacts our towns and vice versa. So, and taking that all into consideration. But yeah, check it out if you're interested.
Yeah, and all those meetings are being recorded. So, if folks are really, really interested, you can always check them out in video form. But I think that for each of those meetings, there's a spreadsheet similar to ours that has the relevant pathway strategies and actions that the different groups are focused on. So that's a good way to kind of see what the work is that those groups are doing. Any questions, comments from others on that?
Andrew?
Thanks, Billy. I think just speaking for our group, which has several strategies and actions related to complex settlement, it would be really good to get some feedback about how what that cross-cutting work group is coming up with, because we're finding it a little challenging to look at some of those because of the inherent contradiction that a lot of our compact settlement or villages that are in the floodplain or other places where there's some real issues related to the resilience in the face of climate change. So it makes it hard to think about what we should be recommending in those situations. So it'd be good to hear what that group comes up with for that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We talked about that a little bit earlier today. I think part of the challenge is that this cross-cutting group, the compact settlement topic, is focused more around settlement that reduces carbon emissions through having walkable rather than drivable communities, density, things of that nature. So it's less focused on the resilience piece. I think most of that work lives within the Rural Resilience Subcommittee. So this is, again, the challenge of this structure that we're all operating under, where there's all these kind of cross-cutting ideas that are put into different groups. So I think Jael and I are both on that one. I'm happy to share what we've learned there. If there also may be the opportunity to kind of like liaise with the Rural Resilience Group that's really focused on these issues related to risk reduction and adaptation and resilience from flooding and other climate threats. So as you're kind of getting through your work, if there's value in being connected with one of the kind of co-chairs or members of that group to bounce ideas off of, we could certainly facilitate that.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, I'll just add, I mean, it's a complex situation because as we look at kind of the flooding patterns of our rivers in each of these towns, we might have to relocate the towns onto prime ag soil or into forested land. And so I think that's where it really impacts the work that we do in terms of that planning and how we're going to do, you know, build out these compact settlements and build new housing and all those things, but also preserve our working lands. So I guess that's the sticky point where we have to work through in this committee.
Any other questions, comments on this cross-cutting approach that we're undertaking for the council? All right, we're a little ahead of schedule. Oh, no, we're not. We're right on schedule. Sorry. Okay, JL, would you mind kicking off this next topic?
Yeah, so we had at our last meeting talked a little bit about having an input session for Indigenous people, Abenaki inhabitants of Vermont. And Earl, I meant to reach out to you. I just didn't have the capacity. So we thought we could have this discussion here today, or we could take it, offline and have it somewhere else in terms of planning this. If this is something that we should do, how it would look, who should be invited, those types of things. Judy or Earl, if you have thoughts on the.
Well, I have thoughts. I, of course, have thoughts. I apologize for missing the last meeting. I was working with climatologists in the Gulf of Maine, hanging on to the side of a lobster boat for my dear life. My concerns are plentiful in what was discussed at the last meeting. Number one, I don't think there should be such few categories. The name of this group is Agriculture and Ecosystems. So where are we hearing from people about the water, about the air, about the weather, about all of these things and how they impact us? We're giving specific permission to talk to foresters and what was the other one? Foresters and farmers? I can't remember what the
We have a farmer and forestry
okay,
focused one, and then a more general focused one.
right. And the more general focused one is the Abenaki, right? Is that what you're saying? No.
No, this would be in addition, the Abenaki.
So
There would be three.
So for me, there should be more than three. There should be many that we're hearing from because we're not talking about just foresters. We're not talking about just one thing. And that holds true with the Abenaki. There are many cultural groups in this state that are interested in this topic. And to give one whole session to just the Abenaki and not include the other cultural groups is not a good use of time because there's so many topics that are missing from this.
I think, just to clarify, I was thinking of having a session that was focused more on indigenous ecological knowledge and inviting, the Abenaki and all indigenous people in the state to kind of lead that input session. That was my original thought.
Yeah, and that was what I was talking about in the last meeting, and I still think that that's appropriate. However, I also agree with Judy that we need to bring in BIPOC folks, other cultures. And so I agree that there should be multiple meetings. And I would personally like to see this discussion with Abenaki and indigenous peoples in Vermont. I think that's important to get indigenous knowledge embedded, or as Judy likes to say, braided within this work that we're doing. So I do think that there should be this conversation, there should be this meeting, but talking with Judy about this, there's also other cultures as well, and they should be involved, and their cultures, their perspectives should be braided also within this work that we're doing. So I agree with the idea of multiple. Thank you, Leonie.
So are you thinking, Judy, like, or Earl, for input sessions, or
Well,
combining the indigenous knowledge input session with inviting all people from all sorts of backgrounds?
Well, that's what I'm thinking, because as a member of the Social Equity Caucus, I hear about these issues all the time from, I'm thinking right off the top of my head, the Richard Kemp Center. They're on Riverside Avenue. They're across the street from McNeil. And many of their people live right there. And we should be hearing from them.
Yeah, and I'm on the steering committee of the Environmental Justice Network, and a member of Vermont Relief as well. And I know that there's interest from those groups and others. And I think that they should be allowed to be included, which also, gets to what Judy is saying as well. Some of them live in the Burlington area and are affected as well, but they live all over Vermont. And many of them are practicing their cultures here in Vermont and need to be included. I still would prefer to see the indigenous as one meeting, and then a general BIPOC low income meeting as well. And I think that would better clarify their perspectives, by meeting, and that way we get stronger clarification, I think, doing it that way. That's just my opinion.
Okay, thanks for clarifying that, Earl.
Yeah.
Do we have the capacity for that? Can we?
Well, I was going to just point out that, and Sophie, I don't think is on, but Liz may be able to speak to this. I believe there's fairly extensive outreach underway broadly on behalf of the Climate Council with community action organizations and the BIPOC community. The sessions that are facilitated for our subcommittee is by no means the only outreach and engagement that's happening with Vermonters. And I know that there's been a particular focus on frontline communities, low income, and BIPOC Vermonters over the course of all of the council's work this year. So I think that there is outreach happening there. That's not to say we couldn't do more if we choose to, but I do think there's a fairly concerted effort underway to engage those folks early in the decision-making process.
I don't see that from my perspective.
Okay.
And that's why I would argue that we need to have that meeting. We need to have that inclusion in this work.
I don't see it either.
Okay.
But it's not only that, it's like we just have this tunnel vision with forest and farmers. we've got to go bigger than that. What
Well,
about the health of the water? I mean, I do a lot of classes and programs with Leslie Ann Giroux, and there's so much that people need to know that we talk about and that need to be a part of what we're doing on this committee. We're talking about ecosystems. Ecosystems are impacted in other areas other than farming and forestry.
Absolutely. And I think just to clarify, the second of the facilitated sessions that we're having in November is broadly focused on ecosystems, natural lands, unmanaged forests, things of that nature. So that second session is intended, I think, to be as broad as possible to capture all those themes.
And water will be included.
Certainly.
Someone
If
will
people,
speak about
yeah,
that.
we can try to be active in our invitations to make sure folks who are focused on water. And all of you have those meeting invites, and you're certainly welcome to forward them on to anyone who you think would have an interest in participating in the conversation.
So if I understand you correctly, you're talking about that second meeting would be all inclusive of farmers, loggers, and BIPOC, indigenous. Is that what you're saying?
well,
No,
the first meeting is more for farmers and foresters, and then the second meeting is for more the general public and incorporating all those other ecosystem concerns. And then we were thinking a third input session focused on indigenous ecological knowledge. And then, I mean, if we need to do a fourth that's more specific to BIPOC and low income people, that's something we can consider. But Evan, you have your hand up.
Yeah, thanks, Jael. Can you hear me okay? Yeah, I just want to note that both of these input sessions are very broad-based and remind folks that this isn't solely based on like extraction and economies. When we're talking, the first one is centered around, farms, local food production, farm workers, organizations that support farm businesses. And we recognize at the same time that, farmers and farm managers are also managing woodland. So it's like very broad, broad approach there. And also, riparian buffers and things like that. The second one is focused on, more forested areas, natural lands, woodlands, that kind of thing, even, wetlands. So it's a very broad kind of broad input session for both, with a little bit more targeted invites going to different groups. But if there are people, those invites are going out to kind of yesterday, today, and tomorrow. And if there's certain people that you'd like us to invite, please let me know, and I'd be happy to include them.
I would throw out the term for you, safe space. Lumping all of these folks together, it means that the indigenous and the BIPOC are not going to feel like speaking freely in the context of the others that will be there. And so please consider that. And that's why we're advocating for the indigenous meeting and the BIPOC low income meeting, so those folks are together and you can actually hear their concerns and they'll feel free to speak. So I'll just leave you with that.
yeah. So thanks for that, Earl. I think we're certainly, I think we were already contemplating having a kind of a group focused for Indigenous folks so that they could have that kind of safety and be as transparent and kind of direct as they would like in that setting. And if it sounds like we want to explore that for other BIPOC members of the state, we can certainly look into getting that set up as well.
I think you should not have a specific one for indigenous and put BIPOC all together, because you're talking about thousands of people who did not belong to those 4 tribes. And you're talking about all kinds of people of color that have an interest. And so to repeat it one more time just seems ridiculous. Just do it all together.
Yeah, I don't disagree with Judy. I would like to see 2 separate meetings, but I understand and about just having one extra meeting and lumping everyone together, BIPOC, Indigenous, low income. If that's what folks want to do, I'm okay with that.
Could we have one
Personally, I'm in
meeting?
favor of 2 separate meetings, but that's just me, and I'll go along with consensus.
Mhm. Could we have one meeting, Earl, with breakout sessions?
Yeah, one meeting is okay. I'm not pounding my fist on the table here. I was just recommending 2 separate meetings so that Indigenous could really speak freely, and by Indigenous I mean Indigenous, not just the bands, but the families and also the other Indigenous peoples that live here. I think they all should be included in this. I
Yeah.
agree with Judy on that. I was just wanting to see a separate meeting for Indigenous. But if y'all would rather do it all together like Judy is recommending, I'm okay with that as well.
I think it's really up to you two. I mean, I'm open to having both, and if we can figure, get it on the calendar.
Well, in our cultures, the women lead, and so I'll go with Judy if that's the pleasure of the committee.
Okay. But we could organize it where we have, breakout sessions during the Zoom meeting for one specifically for Indigenous and one
But
for BIPOC.
then you come into that category of divide and conquer. Once you start dividing people up, then you get, oh, well, we have this problem, and the 2 never meet. They never get discussed together. And the problems often are mutual. And while we're on this subject, last year, Billy, there was a committee that was formed and paid for by the Climate Council funds to research the effects of the greenhouse gases from McNeil in the 1 mile area. What are the results of that? We should probably have that to share with the other cultural groups before we invite them.
I don't know the status of that, but we can certainly get an update for everybody.
That would be good to have, because if we're talking about the largest BIPOC population in Burlington being within that 1 mile, we should make them aware of it before we invite them.
Sounds good.
Yeah, I would like some format, invitation or whatever, with some perspective on what we're doing in order to be able to present that to the groups that I'm working with, and it would be helpful for Judy as well to get these invitations out with a little background of what will be covered in the meetings and explaining the open-endedness of the meeting so that everyone can talk. And so if we have something like that as an invitation, that would be really helpful.
Yeah, I agree with that. And if there was to be a 4th meeting, I would want to include something with water and air and weather, not clump it all together with farmers.
Okay. Thanks. Well, I think that gives Jael and I a lot to work with. At a minimum, we will explore this 3rd meeting and get some proposed agenda and materials out for folks to consider. and then talk about whether a fourth meeting is going to be possible as well. And then we'll try to get an update on where the actions related to biomass stand, including some of the research and surveying that was discussed last time.
That would be helpful, I think.
Yeah, I agree.
Because our committee has talked about that as we've gone through the different strategies. We're like, well, there was supposed to be this research done. We haven't heard about that. So that would be helpful to our subcommittee too.
Great.
Or subcommittee, whatever we are.
Okay. Any other questions or comments on these topics before we move on to the next one? All right. Well, thanks for all that guidance and input, everyone. All right. So we're gonna pause here for our first opportunity for public comment. We'll have another one before we break at the end of the meeting. So if any members of the public are here and would like to share something with the group, please raise your Zoom hand or make yourself known otherwise. All right, definitely got some members of the public here, but happy for folks just to listen, and certainly there'll be an opportunity to weigh in again before we.
I'd like to make one more comment, if
Please.
possible.
You're always welcome to make a comment, Judy. You're on the subcommittee, so you can talk whenever you want.
Thank you. So the comment is in regards to possibility of a fourth meeting. As the state climatologist, Leslie Ann has presented specific weather patterns as I have with her. We take the traditional knowledge, we combine the Western science, and we do this class together to show the specific patterns. But this is something clearly farmers should have. This is information clearly farmers should have. We've only been doing classes for educators now so they could teach their students, but farmers and foresters should know that there's distinct patterns in the weather that are causing the flooding, where the flooding is happening, and which is causing severe storms, where the storms are happening. And so if nothing else, I think it would be really good if that fourth category would have some time with Leslie Ann. She has some amazing charts and videos and things that just show the direction of stuff. And I think it clearly impacts stuff we're talking about.
Okay, we can certainly try to figure out how to see what that, if that makes sense for a fourth meeting. So, Stephen, some thoughts on that?
I just wanted to add in, Billy, more speaking, not as a member of the subcommittee, but as a citizen farmer, just listening to the conversation on how new zoning because of increased flooding could threaten prime ag lands and mature forests in the state just brings me again to wanting to raise the idea of statewide land use planning as hopefully an outcome of the Climate Council process, that it really becomes clear that to move forward in a rational and ecologically conscious way, we really need that kind of overview and integrated planning. And then I just wanted to just make it really clear from my perspective as somebody who's been involved in small diversified farming for the last 30 years that farmers and loggers who choose to try to gain their livelihood in an ecologically conscious way are often disfavored by the system and are also low income folks to boot. But thanks for the opportunity to share that.
Yeah, great points and observations, Stephen. Just a little update. There's been kind of on and off for years an interest in developing statewide land use map or statewide zoning. There was some legislation that passed last year that moved that concept forward, but in a slightly different way. Act 181, which was a kind of comprehensive update to Act 250 and some other housing related topics, did create and kind of charge regional planning commissions to develop future land use maps for their regions using consistent criteria and categories for the first time. Regional plans have always included future land use maps, but they've kind of varied dramatically from region to region. But the hope is now with these kind of consistent requirements, they can be used as like puzzle pieces, and when put together, they would effectively be a statewide land use plan. So that's kind of the hope and intent of that legislation, and a lot of that work is going to be underway over the next couple of years. So keep an eye out for that. Marley, I saw you had your hand up a second ago. I don't know if you still have something you want to share.
I put a note in the chat, Billy. I just wanted to share some of what Leslie Ann and also Joshua Faulkner have done with farmers. Thanks.
Great. Okay. Any other questions, comments on these topics or others before we move on to our next piece? Right on time. All right, so now we're going to shift our focus to the wonderful work of the core work of our group that's happening right now in the task groups. And this is to go through the initial climate action plan, the relevant pathway strategies and actions for our subcommittee, and to begin to identify any modifications that are necessary and ultimately come up with a handful of recommendations to forward on as priorities to the council. It would be great to hear from each of the task groups shortly on kind of where you stand. But just a reminder that we plan to, at our next meeting, which is in 2 weeks on Thursday, November 7th, begin our conversation as a full group on those prioritizations and updates. In the following week, we'll begin to have these input sessions that we've been discussing. So over the month of November and into early December, our hope is to work as a full subcommittee to refine the work of the task groups to a final recommendation to the council. And if, we'll want to hear from you all today on the task groups. It would be optimum if you would be able to provide your initial recommendations to Jael and I, a day or two before the 7th, so then we could kind of try to compile them in a way that makes sense and share them back out to the group. We appreciate everyone's run-in with some tight timelines. So if that's not going to be possible, let us know. But that would be a preferred option. So with that, I guess it would be just good to hear from the different task groups on kind of how you're doing, whether that timeline makes sense to you all. If there's anything Jael, myself, or the kind of agency staff that's supporting us can do to be of assistance. So let's just use this time as like a general check-in on kind of where the task groups stand. Andrew, I think your hand is up. I think that's a new hand, so go for it.
Sure. Yeah. So I'll start talking about the incentivized climate-based task group. I'm not sure I got that right, but Judy and Earl and I have met several times and spent a fair amount of time on our own, also reviewing the strategies and actions. I think there's about 80 of them in that group. And we are about 2/3 of the way through working on the strategies and actions, and trying to decide whether to remove them or revise them. And I would say in the vast majority of cases, we're right now suggesting revisions to the strategies and actions. Most of them are relatively minor, but some of them are more than that. And we have not yet had a conversation about a small group of priorities that we would call out of that. But I think doing the work that we're doing now will make that easier to do in the future. But it's been great conversations, and I think we're making progress. In terms of a timeline, I think we'll definitely be through the process I just described. Hopefully by tomorrow. We have another meeting tomorrow, but then we'll need to go back through and look again, and then maybe start the process of a small group of priorities. So that's kind of where we are, and I would ask Judy and Earl if they had any other things they wanted to highlight based on our initial discussions.
I think we discussed when we get to a point where we've completed going through them, we wanted to have Marley come. She offered to come and look at everything and give us a chat. But we also have requests, so where it says things have been implemented or ongoing, or we want to know how is this happening? What was done to make this happen? Because we have questions about the original recommendation. And with those questions and the fact that it's completed, we want to know how it was eventually completed. So we have a lot of questions as well.
Okay, well, first of all, that's fantastic progress. Andrew, Judy, and Earl, sounds like you've been doing a ton of work, so thank you for that. And yeah, on that question of kind of the status of different actions and how they've been implemented, that's certainly that's stuff that I can help with. Jael and I can kind of direct those questions to the kind of lead implementers and whatnot. So at any point, if we can be helpful, feel free to kind of pass those inquiries on to us so we can get you some answers or connect you with the people who can.
Thank you.
Andrew, Andrew, go ahead.
I would say that would be really helpful. And when we meet tomorrow, maybe we can turn that into some specific requests that we can put forward to you. And I just wanted to, I don't know whether this is the right time, but I wanted to build on the earlier conversation and just say that we do have some concerns about the public input sessions that are around farms, and then forestry and natural lands, I think is what the second one is called. And just making sure if the forestry and natural lands is the place where we're really looking for a broad set of input on the ecological ecosystems, and making sure that that's, as Judy said, it's about lands and waters. It's about conservation and restoration and nature-based solutions. And I guess my concern is that we want to make sure that the invitees are ones that can provide most meaningful input on those topics, and not have it be forestry with a little bit of other input on this broader set of ecological implications. So we've had some discussions on that, and I just wanted to flag that.
Great. And I saw Evan just jump back on. I don't know, Evan, at some point, would it be possible to just share the current invite lists for the respective sessions with the group, so folks know who is being contacted? And then, as we've discussed, you all are absolutely empowered to kind of forward those invitations on to whoever you think would be most helpful to contribute to the conversation. So are those invite lists like, oh, look at that. Looks like Evan has put the invite lists in the chat. So folks kind of peruse that at your leisure. And then if there's any gaps, you can feel free to either contact Evan directly and he could forward the invite. Or I also believe it's a Zoom invite that we all have in our calendars that you can forward on to individuals or organizations as well.
Yeah, I just want to reiterate that these input sessions are not strictly, economies based and extractive. Like it is very broad. The people that I have listed, kind of touch all points of things from water to land, and try to make sure of that. But, if you feel like there's anyone I'm missing, again, please let me know. I'm happy to do that outreach. Sophie is also happy to do that outreach. And we can make sure that those people are invited.
Great. Thanks, Evan.
Earl, did you want to add anything to our group?
There we go. Oh, well, thank you, Judy. No, I think you and Andrew have done a good job of expressing our work in this test group. For my part, I just want to thank Judy and Andrew. It's a real pleasure working with the two of you, and I've learned a lot in the process. So I appreciate it very much. I think we're doing very well. Looney.
Awesome. Thank you all. All right, Jake's got his hand up. He wants to go next. So what do you got, Jake? What's happening?
So very, very similar to the last update. So I am a part of task group 2, which is focused on sort of the economies and workforce components. And so, yeah, we have met twice. We are kind of getting close to be able to transition more to narrowing down and really starting to prioritize a smaller list of strategies. So we've done like a first pass, had some good conversations about understanding where we have alignment or clear alignment for strategies. And yeah, and there's definitely been things we've identified where I think there will be revisions or just some more time needed to perhaps even consolidate some strategies into something new. So we're starting to get to a place where we can do that. And yeah, and I feel like we're on track to have this, have our process completed before the 7th. We do have, I mean, there are a lot of strategies that fall under this task group. So we're also just thinking about there has been some conversations about like overlapping elements to what we're looking at and what task group 3 may be looking at, and also what task group 1 may be looking at. So it'll just be interesting, I think, as we come back together, to see where there's additional opportunities to, prioritize things that have kind of mutual benefits across these different groups. And yeah, and I do, Jael, I apologize, but I will include you as part of the invite for our next one, and Marley as well. It'd be great to just have some more perspective and input as we get now that we have a little more clarity as to like a more manageable list of strategies that we think we can kind of dive into in a deeper sense.
Great. Well, thanks for that update. And good to hear all the work that you all are doing. Thank you for that. Would certainly encourage all the task groups to kind of tap into the staff that have identified as kind of interested and available at any point, because they both have a lot of good ideas and can help get some work done if needed. But if you feeling you've got a good cadence right now with just your group, keep proceeding. And yeah, I think November 7th is going to be a start. We're going to try to have the work of the task groups as complete as possible, but certainly over the month of November, early December, there'll be time for those groups to kind of get back together and finish things up or refine where you're at as of early this month. So thanks for that update, Jake. Anything else from anyone else from Jake's group that has any thoughts, questions, comments? Anyone from the last task group here who wants to share an update?
Have you guys met? No.
All right. Well, you've got some good inspiration from your colleagues here to get going. And again, if the various staff, so this is the carbon reduction work group. I think that's Brian and Alyssa. You guys have some real
that was
expertise.
The first one. I thought that was task group 1. Doesn't matter the number, but
yeah.
I'd be happy to share an update on the mitigation group. I thought you were pointing to another group. I apologize.
No, just whichever one was left of the 3. So that's you all. So sorry.
Copy that. All right. Guess there isn't 4 this time. Yeah, thanks. So we have not met yet. We're planning to meet next week, but luckily we were building on probably the most organized set of recommendations that have significant research attached to them as far as what is their impact on whether you want to look through the lens of gross emissions or net sequestration. There's a lot of good established literature out there. Where I'm at the agency is we have results from the implementation since the Climate Action Plan was implemented. And so looking at this narrowly through the lens of cost effectiveness and effectiveness to kind of review the very robust plan that was put together the last round, I think is where we may identify and perhaps reorder those practices which have the most potential to not only help improve soil health on a farm and all those attendant benefits, but also to begin to quantify what the net benefit of those conservation practices that have been implemented since then might represent in CO2 equivalents sequestered in the soil. And so really, it's an analysis that we're working on because I think the framework is been working, but we absolutely will start with analyzing the framework to make sure it all makes sense with folks, to folks, and then next week can return for the 7th, I guess that's in 2 weeks, to share an output of that analysis and kind of checking in with what we set up last time, how has it been going. So that's the general pathway, and our first meeting will be next Wednesday, the 30th.
Great. Thanks, Ryan. Any other comments from the mitigation group before we move on to Judy's comment? Okay, thank you. And again, like everyone else, feel free to, lean on agency staff to the extent that it makes sense for your group. So awesome. Well, thanks everyone for self-motivating and organizing and kind of getting the work going. I know it's not easy, but really appreciate you all doing it. And if Jael and I can be of assistance in any way, don't hesitate to reach out. Okay, Judy, what would you like to share?
A lot of our recommendations had to do with nature-based solutions. And we've reached a point, I think, where nature-based solution isn't the only answer. People have to stop doing certain things. And I'm just wondering if we are the only ones that don't have recommendations in our category that talk about people changing. Do the other categories have something about people changing, or is that just absent from everything we're working on?
I think in terms of people changing, we need to address like the way that we farm and grow our food and produce food that needs to change. So that's people managing the production of food differently. So that's one where people.
So who's addressing those?
I think they're being addressed kind of in all aspects. Alyssa?
Yeah, there's quite a bit of that in the group that Jake and Stephen and I are on. And there's a number of like education and other recommendations that I think, Judy, you had a hand in crafting that are part of our list of practices
Okay.
and strategies. So there's quite a bit in that one around like training and education to both the general public, but also to, land and water stewards. And
Okay, thank you. Because we go through these 80 recommendations and it's all about nature-based solutions. And I'm like, damn, they're expecting a lot of nature. What about people changing? And so that's where I was looking where they were addressed. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm glad you're raising that, Judy, because that's what I'm thinking about. Like, as we're looking at these things in isolation, these questions come up of like, yeah, what's the other side of this? Like, is this accounted for? And that's I think when we bring it back together as a group, is just making sure that like these things are actually complementary or that they have the right like educational support behind it. So I'm glad you've raised that too, just as we're still looking at ours to make sure that we can prioritize that component in what we're looking at.
Thank you.
Hey, Evan.
Yeah, sorry for jumping in more than usual here, but if you didn't get a copy of the full list of old pathway strategies and actions, I'm happy to share that with you to see like what the other two groups are working on. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, Ryan. Mitigation has a lot to do with actually changing behaviors there. So there are a lot of actions that are there that are actually just changing people's behavior.
Thanks, Evan. Good point. So yeah, I think that's
definitely. But I do think Judy has a good point about consumption and how we organize ourselves as a society. You can do all the education outreach you want in the world, but a lot of the social science research I've seen shows that there's always going to be a gap unless there's a regulatory trigger for certain, depending on. I'm not trying to speak in generalizations, but just to identify the limits of the role of this group. And while I think it's perfectly fine to discuss how we could change our behaviors that would have an impact on the climate, I do think it is something that is that as a small state of Vermont, I think we have to look to the federal government for a number of those regulatory changes that would make a meaningful difference on CO2 levels in the atmosphere and recognize the limit of what individual actions can actually do to affect climate change. It is going to require state level action to engender that sort of significant reductions in emissions or increase in sequestration. So totally worth talking about, but I just want to make a note about the limits of power and what we can and can't affect.
Thanks, Ryan. Okay, other comments, questions, thoughts on updates on task groups work, things that we can do to support that. Any thoughts on whether task groups think they could deliver something to JL and I a couple days before the 7th, or are you guys all going to be kind of storming into that meeting on the 7th hot?
A clarifying question with that is, like, should each subgroup aim to have like our top 5 or top 10? Like how, yeah, how narrow should should we aim to be by that time? And then what then will we continue to discuss and prioritize as a full group? That's the one part of it that I'm not sure where we're going to be prior to the 7th.
Yeah, I think, Jal, would love your thoughts on this, but I think, working with those templates, cataloging kind of any kind of changes or modifications you're thinking to make to any of the existing actions, if any. And then I think from each task group, I don't think, I think we'd be looking at something like, a half a dozen or so priority actions. My sense is that from each subcommittee, the council is only looking for like 6 to 8 priorities. So at some point, we're going to have to work as a group to identify what those are. But I would imagine probably having 5 or 6 out of each task group to start with is probably reasonable, understanding that those might get whittled down a little bit.
Okay. Yeah,
So
that's
that's
helpful.
good to you, Jael.
Yeah, my understanding is we're still going to review it all as a whole subcommittee, and then kind of give our thumbs up to what the task group selected, or say, actually, we think you should select this other one for these reasons, kind of discussion. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and with that in mind, I'm just thinking for us, we might maybe organize things as like tier 1 priorities, tier 2, because I don't want to come with a list of 6 that excludes maybe some things that other folks may see and say that actually I think is more important than number 6 on your list. So yeah, just trying to figure out how to narrow, but not do it in a way that's excluding what could be some really important input from other members of the committee.
That sounds good, Jake.
Okay.
Andrew, what are you thinking?
Yeah, so for task group 3, I think I'm fairly confident that we can provide a fully filled out template with revisions for strategies and actions. We haven't really had the discussions yet about, picking a small subset as the highest priority. So I don't know that I'd want to promise that yet. We can try. I will say that the less that we can put forward, the more broad they're going to probably be to be somewhat encompassing, but we'll see how that goes when we start to talk it through.
Okay, great. That sounds totally reasonable, so thank you. Let's see. Anybody else? Thoughts, questions, comments? All right. So I don't know if there's too much more for us to do today. I think, the work right now is really happening in the task groups. Jael and I will continue to participate on these cross-cutting groups and report out as we learn more. We'll explore setting up at least a third and possibly a fourth input session. We'll look to see where the recommendations of the council related to kind of biomass stand and whatever associated surveys or research might have been associated with that, and look for any outreach from the task groups for help figuring out what the implementation status of the initial plans actions, where that stuff stands. Anything else? Go ahead, Judy.
Thank you, Billy. I'm specifically interested in the health component survey that I can't remember her name. They hired a blonde woman and that lived in the neighborhood, and she was going to survey all the people that lived there. I can't remember.
Toshka, something like that.
Yeah, it's a different name. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. We'll definitely. We'll look into it and see where all that stuff stands.
Thank you.
That particular piece stands.
Thank you.
Anything else that you all need from JL and I or want to raise with the group before we break today? Okay, we're running about half hour ahead of schedule, but it is what it is. So we'll pause here to see if anyone who's not a member of the subcommittee, member of the public, would like to kind of share any questions, comments, thoughts at this time. Okay. Well, thanks for those of you who have been with us today. Appreciate your time. And I guess with that, we might as well adjourn. And, reminder, we've got a meeting 2 weeks from today, same time. Jael and I will check in with task group leads at some point before that meeting, see how you're doing, and ideally get your templates, as far in advance of that meeting as possible, so we can try to compile some stuff. And we'll follow up on these other items and hopefully have an update for everyone when we next convene. Anything else from you, Jael, before we break?
No, just send me an email about when you're meeting. I'll try and participate if I have space.
Awesome. Thanks for doing that. All right. Well, thanks everyone. Enjoy the first actual day of fall, it feels like, now that it's not in the 70s anymore. And we'll see you in a couple weeks. Bye.
Everyone.